After a few days of negotiations hanging in the balance, the Sixers have officially signed and traded Buddy Hield to land him on the Golden State Warriors. We got the official announcement from Shams Charania saying that the Golden State Warriors have agreed to a deal acquiring Buddy Hield via sign and trade from the 76ers, sources tell The Athletic and Stadium. New teammates Hield and Steph Curry are leaders for the most three-pointers made over the last 5 seasons, and now will be teammates. And I'm not going to lie, the return, a little underwhelming. That for the Sixers, the Warriors are sending back a 2031 Dallas second-round pick to complete the sign and trade deal. This was a move that was much more about the Sixers didn't have a ton of interest in signing Buddy. You're at least getting something in return, and really the overarching theme here is this is what the Warriors needed to get him on roster because of their financial and salary cap implications that come with the taxes that they are paying there. But for the Sixers, this does force their hand a little bit, as while Buddy was not a perfect player, this is a guy they're still going to have to replace. And to bring up what he brought to the floor this season, not a guy who shined as much as it was hoped, but still 12.1 points, 3.2 rebounds, 2.8 assists, shot 43.6% from the field, 38.6% from beyond the three-point arc, also 43.6% on corner threes, and 66.8% of his shots being three-pointers. Buddy Hield was a guy that was a forever almost Sixer. I still think this was worth the swing at the trade deadline. I still think Daryl Morey is correct in his statement that Buddy Hield was the best player traded at the trade deadline. It takes two to tango for any source of these deals, so the fact that they were able to get him was at least a worthwhile shot. There were other irons in the fire that the Sixers were trying to get done, such as Andre Drummond, who now is a member of the Sixers for this season. But the reality being that Buddy Hield just didn't work. And I do think there is a world where he does work with the Golden State Warriors, so we'll be rooting for Buddy from here. We will always have that Game 6 explosion that he did produce from beyond the arc there, and overall, wishing him the best wishes. But for the Sixers, they do still have to find a way to replace Buddy and fill out the rest of his roster. That at this point in time, we're still talking about just 8 players on this team, with Paul Reed being one who's unlikely to be here, even though he is on this roster at this point in time. So let's take a look at some of the best available remaining free agents to talk about a few guys that I do think could be nice fits on the Sixers team. So looking at some of the best available free agents, Brett Seigel of Clutch Points tweeting this out here. At point guard, he tweets Kyle Lowry, Tyus Jones, Markelle Fultz, Spencer Dinwiddie, Dennis Smith Jr., at shooting guard, Gary Trent Jr., Malik Beasley, Luke Canard, Isaac Okoro, Lonnie Walker IV, DeMar DeRozan, Miles Bridges, Caleb Martin, Gordon Hayward, and Sadiq Bey at small forward. At power forward, Precious Achiuwa, Robert Covington, Dario Saric, Markieff Morris, Chuma Okeke, and I do believe that's meant to be Marcus Morris, not Markieff there. And then the centers, Daniel Tice, Cody Zeller, JaVale McGee, Tristan Thompson, and Bismack Biyombo. So not the most overwhelming amount of talent left, but we know that the Sixers already made their big splash, that this is now filling out the roster, finding guys that can be key rotation players, and they also got to dig through the bargain bin a little bit. The reality of the Sixers salary cap situation, they essentially have $9 million to work with. They can always sign guys to minimums, so minimums aren't something that impact your salary cap space there. So they can sign as many minimums as they want, but a real deal above that margin, they don't have a ton to work with. So a couple names that I do think are interesting there. For starters, when thinking about the framework of this Sixers team, we essentially have in the starting lineup, it's going to be Tyrese Maxey, Kelly Oubre, Paul George, Joel Embiid, and that fifth guy is still uncertain. So a couple directions that I want to go here. For starters, my preference would be a true power forward, that I think they need a high-level rebounder, a guy who is a grunt work dude, will do the dirty work and defend at a high level alongside Joel Embiid. And the number one name out of this list, the available free agents that they have to work with, which again, a little bit not the most appealing options here, but the number one that jumps out to me that I do think could be a fit, it is Precious Achiuwa. And to dive into what he produces, 7.6 points, 6.6 rebounds, 1.3 assists per game, also 0.9 blocks, shot 50.1% from the field. The three-pointers aren't overly inspiring, but he is a guy who's attempted over 100 three-pointers in 2 different occasions in his career, averages a little bit over 1 3-point attempt per game, so he's not a non-shooter, even though he's not a knockdown guy. He's a guy who will still step out. 59.3% of his twos are assisted. He is still just 24 years old. I think it's more likely than not that he does end up returning to the New York Knicks there, but I think it is worthwhile to give him a call. I think he is the type of guy that it would be worth taking a swing on. But there are other names that I want to talk about as well, and a guy that I think you could certainly argue raises the talent level of the Sixers team more than a Precious Achiuwa one. Precious being more of a fit, having the fit in mind for the direction they're going there. But another guy that seems a little bit more likely, and there's been rumors and connections to the Sixers, is Caleb Martin here. And Martin, a 10-point-per-game scorer, 4.4 rebounds, 2.2 assists, shot 43.1% from the field, 34.9% from three. He's 6'5", 28 years old, shoots just 32.9% from the corner with 92.6% of his threes all being assisted there. I like Caleb Martin quite a bit. He's a guy who's shown that dog in him, that's gone in some deep playoff runs and has been a Celtics killer at portions of time, which I do think is noteworthy there. And I do think when talking about raising the ceiling of the Sixers team, that's probably the best option out of these straight up free agents. Certainly they could do something creative through a trade type situation where you're bringing in a higher level talent. But just off these names, I think Caleb Martin is probably the most appealing name there. And there is something too, thinking about that lineup, that starting five of Tyrese Maxey, Kelly Oubre, Caleb Martin, Paul George, and Joel Embiid. We're on some demon time with that one. And I think that trio of Caleb Martin, Paul George, and Kelly Oubre is pretty solid for how it's going to stand up for perimeter defense, which has to be pretty close to the top of the Sixers' mind when thinking about how to beat the Celtics and the Knicks and the other teams like that. Having that trio would be pretty appealing there. Way more versatile, way more athletic, way more positionless than we've seen with the Sixers team. And I do think that is an appealing factor there. But they still got to round out and find a full 15. So it can't be just Caleb Martin there. That they got to find some other names as well. So a couple more guys that are available in that free agent market. These are guys that I still would consider spending a little bit of money using that available cap space and then being pinned against the wall to use minimums to the rest of it. Three more names that I do want to bring up here. Next up, Gary Trent Jr. He's a guy who 13.7 points per game, 2.6 rebounds, 1.7 assists, 1.1 steals per game. Shot 39.3% from beyond the three-point arc, just 37.8% from the corner, 53.5% of his shots being threes. He is a guy who's much more of like a true two-guard in my mind, that I do think the Sixers would end up being a little bit smaller than would be ideal with Gary Trent Jr., but he does defend, he plays it at a high level, can shoot the ball. There is a history with Nick Nurse, and to acknowledge it, it does feel like they weren't guys that quite got along. There's a couple rumors about them having beef, and mainly what the source of it or what the root of the issue was is that Gary Trent Jr. didn't really like that Nick Nurse would make comments about his critiques of Gary Trent to the media rather than talking directly. I think that's a fair complaint, and I also don't think it's something that would prevent Gary Trent Jr. from wanting to play for the guy again. It doesn't seem like anything to that level, just a little bit of not quite getting along there. So I think Gary Trent Jr. is a worthwhile name to keep an eye on and a guy that would help the Sixers team. And another guy that I do believe could open the floor in a way far better than Buddy Hield in a somewhat similar role, it's Luke Canard. 11 points per game this year with the Memphis Grizzlies, 2.9 rebounds, 3.5 assists. He can play make a little bit more than people give him credit. 45% three-point shooter, one of the best in the entire NBA, 44.8% from the field overall, shot 39.3% from the corner, 94.4% of his threes are assisted, and 75.6% of all of his shots are three-pointers. So what I like about Luke Canard in comparison to Buddy Hield is there is that more willing trigger. He is a guy that you can just give it to him with a little bit of space and he's going to let it fly. He's a much more willing shooter than a guy like Buddy, and I do think that that is important to have that level of floor spacing. And the reason that I say that, with a team built around Joel Embiid, spacing is always going to be the name of the game for me. That's why Paul George is going to be so helpful with the guy who's a high volume and high efficiency type of scorer and shooter. Luke Kennard's another guy who fits that type of equation there, that you can really have four shooters and Joel Embiid on the floor is a really intriguing outlook to have and something I think the Sixers are close to doing. So Luke Kennard, another name. I know he's not a lockdown defender by any means, but he's another guy that I think would be comfortable putting the ball in his hands, having him make some decisions. So Luke Kennard, another name to notice there. Now, again, as I mentioned, there has to be a full 15 here. The Sixers still have plenty more work to do to complete this active roster. And to dive into a couple bargain bin names that I think are worth paying attention to, Robert Covington, I want back on a minimum. And I get that is a little bit of a controversial take. He is a guy who was traded to the Sixers last year, suffered a bone bruise, and was not able to suit up for many months for the remainder of the season. Did not play after looking pretty sharp, I thought, through the first couple weeks when he got here. He also didn't seem to be a Nick Nurse type guy. That Nurse, I thought, didn't play him as much as he probably should have. But ultimately, for a minimum, a guy that's familiar with Philly, likes Joel Embiid, was a part of the process, keep Covington home. And also from a basketball perspective here, he is that type of positionless, versatile wing that they should be looking to get as many as possible. That I do think there's a world where if Covington, the health breaks correctly, which I get is seeming to be a bigger and bigger if at this point in his career, but there are times where he can play some significant minutes for the Sixers team. He could be that power forward to play next to Joel, to be a little bit more of that, grunt work, dirty work type guy. I like Robert Covington. It's a bummer that he was not around in the playoff run, as I do think he would have been helpful in some of these matchups against the Knicks specifically here, being another plus rebounder, a guy that can help out. So that is a name that I would mention. I've also talked about Marcus Morris on here. We know the familiarity with him as well. Did a separate video on him, but I would be interested in Morris back on a minimum absolutely as well. A couple other names to mention, just taking a look at the free agents again. There is a lot of love to Markelle Fultz. While I'm not entirely against it, I do think the money is going to be a little too much for what he has in mind, and I frankly don't see the fit as well as I think a lot of people do. He's still a non-shooter. To his credit, he's turned himself into at least a pretty plus NBA player at this point in time, but he's still a guy that is essentially a non-shooter. There's still some form concerns, or, he's not what he was projected to be. He hasn't found that luck again. He's just found different ways to make himself effective on a basketball court, essentially there. Lonnie Walker IV, I also did want to bring up at the shooting guard position. I'll also mention, shout out to Reading, Pennsylvania, where Lonnie Walker is from, and that's where I went to college up there. They absolutely worship Lonnie Walker, and I think it would be cool to, I get it's not quite a hometown, but it would be in the vicinity of it, and I think that he's a guy who is similar in this archetype. He's athletic, he can catch lobs, he's a guy who the shot comes and goes a little bit with his career, so it's not perfect, but these type of athletes, high-level, high-work rate guys are exactly who these Sixers should be looking to target. So another name that I would have no problem with on a minimum. Probably not a guy I'm willing to spend much more than that on, but I wanted to bring him up for food for thought here. Malik Beasley, I also would love to have on the Sixers team. I think he'll probably be out of the Sixers price range there, but another guy to keep an eye on there. There's also a little bit of love with the Dario Saric reunion, which I can be talked into more than the Markelle Fultz. He is a good playmaker, Dario, which I think they could use another one of those guys to add to the mix. I'd be much more comfortable with him off the bench than him as a starter by any means. I do think they need that starting level 4. Like, he's not going to be Precious Achiuwa in the way that he can defend and impact the game, but overall I wouldn't be mad with the homie Dario coming home for another season there. But the Sixers have a lot of work to do is the ultimate answer to all this. That yes, they traded Buddy Hield. I guess you can look at this positively and say they picked up a second-round pick, so better than not picking up a second-round pick. But ultimately I was a little underwhelmed by what the return was for that. I was hopeful there would at least be something a little bit more value, even when in the first reports it was talking about potential multiple picks or something like that. But regardless, beggars can't be choosers, and the Sixers didn't want Buddy Hield. So that is the reality of this, which I understand. But we'll see what happens from here. Still plenty more to break down. The offseason has gone a little bit quiet at this point in time. We had that flurry of moves to kick things off in free agency, and now things have definitely settled. So we'll see when it picks up again, but I will be here breaking things down from start to finish on Sixers Digest. Appreciate you guys for tuning into this one here, and drop any comments for any other names that you want to throw into the equation for the Sixers team. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. Make sure you're liking this video if you have not already, and I'll talk with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.